somewhere between Fort Sumner and the Pecos River, where the New Mexico Territory stretched endless and unforgiving under the July sun of 1881, Billy Bonney rode toward Lincoln with a price on his head and blood on his conscience. The Kid, as they called him, sat easy in the saddle, despite the Winchester rifle across his lap and the Colt .41 caliber Thunderer riding his hip. He was 21 years old, had killed 8 men by most counts, and expected to die before he saw 22. The heat shimmered off the desert floor, turning distance into liquid mirage. His horse, a stolen roan mare he'd taken from a ranch outside White Oaks, picked her way through the scrub with the tired patience of an animal that had covered too many miles too fast. Billy was thinking about water, about the creek that ran near the old Tunstall store, about whether Sheriff Pat Garrett was still hunting him through these hills, when he saw something that didn't belong. A body, maybe, or a pile of rags dumped beside the trail where it curved around a cluster of rocks. He'd seen enough death to recognize its stillness. His first instinct was to ride past. Dead people brought questions, and questions brought lawmen. But something made him slow the mare. Some detail his outlaw's eye caught that didn't fit the pattern of abandonment. The rags were deerskin, Apache work, and they were moving. Billy dismounted 20 feet away, rifle ready, eyes scanning the rocks for ambush. The Apache had been quiet lately, pushed south by the Army and broken by Victorio's death the year before. But quiet didn't mean gone. He approached on foot, boots crunching on gravel, and got his first clear look at what lay beside the trail. A girl, Apache, maybe 18 years old, sprawled face down in the dirt with her black hair matted with blood and dust. Her deerskin dress was torn, exposing a back covered in bruises that had gone from fresh purple to sickly yellow. Someone had beaten her badly, recently, and left her to die in the sun. Billy's hand tightened on the Winchester. He'd done plenty of things he wasn't proud of. Rustled cattle, shot men who were trying to shoot him first, stolen horses when he needed them. But he'd never raised a hand to a woman. Never would. The men who did that kind of thing were lower than snakes. He knelt beside her, keeping his rifle close, and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Her pulse was there, faint and fast like a bird's heartbeat. Her skin burned with fever. When he turned her over as gently as he could, her eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. She tried to speak, but only a croak came out. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Water," Billy said, more to himself than to her. He went back to his horse and pulled his canteen, half full and warm, but better than nothing. When he lifted her head and pressed the canteen to her lips, she drank desperately, choking and coughing, but unable to stop. "Easy," he said. "Easy now. You'll make yourself sick." She drank until the canteen was empty, then collapsed back against his arm. Up close, even beaten and filthy, she was striking. High cheekbones, strong features, and a face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't swollen and bruised. Her eyes, when they focused on him, held intelligence and something else. Surprise, maybe. Or suspicion. "You speak English?" Billy asked. She nodded weakly. "Who did this to you?" Her lips moved, but no sound came. Billy looked around at the empty desert, at the rocks that offered no answers, and made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't leave her here to die. Couldn't take her to Lincoln where questions would follow. That left only one option: his hideout, a small adobe house 3 miles north that had belonged to a Mexican sheep herder before the man had died of cholera. Billy had been using it for 2 weeks, laying low while Garrett's posse searched the territory. He lifted the girl as carefully as he could. She was tall, taller than most women he'd known, and solid with muscle despite her injuries. When he settled her across his saddle and mounted behind her, her head lolled against his chest. The ride to the adobe took an hour. Billy kept to the low ground, avoiding skylines, watching for dust that might mean riders. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring in Apache, sometimes going rigid with pain when the horse's gait jostled her injuries. By the time they reached the small house, Billy's shirt was soaked with sweat and the girl's fever had climbed higher. He carried her inside and laid her on the narrow cot that served as his bed. The adobe was sparse, one room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and supplies he'd stolen or bought with money from his last cattle sale. He had water from the nearby spring, dried beef, beans, coffee, and a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for when the loneliness got too heavy. Now, he used the whiskey to clean her wounds. She came fully awake when the alcohol hit the gash on her scalp, her scream cutting through the adobe's thick walls. Her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes wild with pain and fear. "It's all right," Billy said quickly. "I'm trying to help. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him for a long moment, breathing hard, then slowly released his wrist. Her eyes never left his face as he worked, cleaning the head wound, checking her ribs for breaks, wrapping the worst of the bruises with strips torn from his spare shirt. When he was done, he sat back and met her gaze. "You're safe here," he said. "Nobody knows about this place. You can rest." "Who are you?" Her voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but her English was clear. Billy hesitated. Giving his name to an Apache girl was either the smartest thing he'd ever done or the stupidest. "Billy," he said finally. "Billy Bonnie." Her eyes widened slightly. "El Chivato," the kid. So she'd heard of him. Most people in the territory had. The newspapers loved printing stories about the young outlaw. Half of them lies, half of them worse than the truth. "You kill many men," she said. It wasn't a question. "Only the ones trying to kill me first," Billy replied. He stood and moved to the fireplace to start a fire for coffee. "What's your name?" She was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. "Nalin," she said finally. "It means maiden." Billy glanced back at her. "Who beat you, Nalin?" Her expression hardened. "Man who says I am his. Man I refuse." Over the next 3 days, Billy learned Nalin's story in fragments. She was the daughter of a respected Apache warrior, promised in marriage to a man named Goyafle, a fierce fighter with 3 wives already and a reputation for cruelty. Nalin had refused the marriage, a defiance that brought shame to both families. Goyafle had beaten her in front of the tribe to break her spirit, and when she still refused, he dragged her into the desert and left her to die as punishment for her dishonor. Billy listened while he changed her bandages, while he cooked beans and made coffee, while they sat in the evening quiet with the desert cooling around them. He told her nothing about himself at first, but she asked questions with the directness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Why you help me? You could leave me to die." "Nobody deserves to die like that," Billy said. Her dark eyes studied him. "You are outlaw. You kill. You steal. Why you care about Apache girl?" "Maybe because I know what it's like to have no choices," Billy said quietly. "To have people decide your life for you and then punish you when you fight back." Something shifted in her expression. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. On the 4th morning, Billy woke to find Nalin standing by the window, testing her weight on legs that had been too weak to hold her the day before. She was still bruised, still moving carefully, but the fever had broken and color had returned to her face. "You should rest," Billy said, sitting up on the floor where he'd been sleeping. "I am strong enough," she replied. Her eyes moved to the door. "I should go." "Where? Back to your people? Back to the man who tried to kill you?" Her jaw tightened. "I have nowhere else." "You can stay here," Billy heard himself say, "until you're healed, until you figure out what's next." "Why?" The question hung between them. Billy didn't have a good answer. Maybe because in 3 days of caring for her, talking to her, watching her fight to recover, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose beyond survival. Connection beyond the shallow friendships of outlaws and saloon girls. She was beautiful, yes, even with the fading bruises. But it was more than that. It was the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her refusal to break, the way she looked at him like he was a man instead of a legend or a target. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I'm just tired of being alone." Nalin studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I stay. One more day." One more day became 2, then 3, then a week. Billy taught Nalin to make coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to strip paint. She taught him Apache words, laughing at his pronunciation. They talked about everything and nothing, about her life in the tribe, about his childhood in New York before his mother died and the West had swallowed him whole. He told her about John Tunstall, the Englishman who'd been like a father to him, murdered by the Murphy-Dolan faction in the Lincoln County War. Told her about the revenge that had turned him from a ranch hand into a killer. She told him about growing up tall and strong, different from other Apache girls, about learning to fight and hunt like the warriors, about the freedom she'd tasted before her father had promised her to Goyathle. At night, Billy slept on the floor while Nalin took the cot. But he was aware of her presence in every breath, every shift of blankets, every soft sound she made in sleep. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, memorizing the line of her jaw, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the rare smile that transformed her face. On the 8th day, Nalin's hand brushed his while they were washing dishes in the basin. The touch lasted only a second, but it sent electricity through Billy's arm. When he looked up, she was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. That night, she spoke from the darkness of the cot. "Billy?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For saving me. For seeing me as person, not shame or property." "You don't need to thank me," Billy said. "Yes," she replied. "I do. Because you give me something I never have before. Choice." The next morning, Billy woke to the sound of horses, many horses, moving fast. He was on his feet with his Colt in hand before his eyes were fully open. Nalin sat up on the cot, her face going pale. "They come," she whispered. "My people." Billy moved to the window and looked out through a gap in the shutters. His blood went cold. The desert around the adobe was filled with Apache warriors, at least 400 of them, maybe more. They sat their horses in perfect silence, forming a circle that surrounded the house completely. There was no escape, no way out. In the center of the circle, a single warrior sat on a painted horse. He was older, his face lined with age and authority, wearing the regalia of a chief. Beside him sat a younger man, powerfully built, with a face twisted by rage. Billy didn't need Nalin to tell him who they were. The chief was her father. The younger man was Goyathle. "We're surrounded," Billy said quietly. He checked his rifle, his Colt, counted the ammunition he had left. Maybe 30 rounds total. Against 400 warriors, it was nothing. "They will kill you," Nalin said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "Goyathle will demand it. He will say you stole me, dishonored him." Billy looked at her, at this woman he'd known for barely more than a week, who had somehow become more important than his own survival. "Then I'll die making sure he doesn't take you back." "No," Nalin stood, moving to his side. "You saved my life. I will not let you die for me." Before Billy could respond, a voice called out from outside, strong, commanding, speaking in English. "White man, send out the girl. Do this and you live." Billy's hand tightened on his rifle. "And if I don't? Then you die. Both of you." Malin touched his arm. "Billy, you must let me go. This is my fight, not yours." "Like hell," Billy said. He moved to the door, rifle ready, and called out, "The girl stays with me. She's under my protection." Laughter rippled through the warriors. The younger man, Goyathle, shouted something in Apache that made the laughter grow louder. Nalin's face flushed with anger. "He says you are fool. Says white boy with gun cannot protect Apache woman from Apache justice." "Tell him," Billy called back, "that this white boy has killed 8 men. I'll make it 9 if he tries to take her." The laughter stopped. Goyathle dismounted and walked toward the adobe, his hand on the knife at his belt. The other warriors watched in silence. When he was 20 feet from the door, he stopped and spoke in broken English. "You think you are warrior? You think you can fight Apache? Come out, fight me. No guns, knives only. You win, girl goes free. I win, I take her and your scalp." Billy felt Nalin's hand tighten on his arm. "He is best knife fighter in tribe," she whispered. "He will kill you." "Probably," Billy agreed, "but it's better odds than 400 against 1. He set down his rifle and pulled his knife, a Bowie blade he'd taken off a dead man in Tularosa. When he opened the door and stepped outside, the morning sun hit him like a physical blow. The circle of warriors tightened, creating an arena. Goyathle smiled, showing teeth filed to points. He was bigger than Billy, heavier with muscle, and he moved with the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight. They circled each other in the dust. Billy had been in knife fights before, quick, desperate things in saloons and alleys. But this was different. This was ritual, combat with rules he didn't fully understand. Goyathle struck first, a lightning-fast slash that would have opened Billy's throat if he hadn't jerked back. The blade missed by inches. Billy countered with a low thrust that Goyathle batted aside contemptuously. They traded blows, testing each other. Billy was faster, but Goyathle was stronger and more experienced. A cut opened on Billy's forearm, then another on his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt. The warriors began to chant, a rhythmic sound that matched the circling fighters. Goyathle was playing with him, Billy realized, drawing it out, making a show of dominance before the kill. Billy changed tactics. Instead of trying to match the Apache's skill, he fought dirty. When Goyathle lunged, Billy didn't dodge. He stepped inside the attack, taking a shallow cut across his ribs in exchange for getting close. He drove his knee into Goyathle's groin with all his strength. The Apache's eyes went wide. His breath left in a whoosh. Billy followed with an elbow to the face that broke Goyathle's nose in a spray of blood. When the bigger man staggered, Billy swept his legs and drove him to the ground. He landed on top with his knife at Goyathle's throat. The chanting stopped. 400 warriors went silent. Billy's chest heaved. Blood dripped from his wounds onto Goyathle's face. The Apache glared up at him with pure hatred, but didn't move. One thrust and it would be over. Billy had killed men for less. But when he looked up and saw Nalin standing in the doorway of the adobe, her face pale with fear and hope, he made a different choice. He stood, pulling his knife away, and stepped back. Goyathle lay in the dust, defeated but alive. The old chief dismounted and walked into the circle. His face was unreadable as he looked from Billy to Goyathle to his daughter. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "You fight with honor, white man. You win, but you do not kill. This shows strength." He turned to Goyathle. "You are defeated. You have no claim to my daughter. She is free." Goyathle pushed himself to his feet, blood streaming from his broken nose. His hand went to his knife. The chief's voice cracked like a whip. "No, it is finished." But Goyathle's rage was beyond reason. He lunged, not at Billy, but at Nalin. Billy moved without thinking. He threw himself between them, taking the knife meant for Nalin in his side. The blade sank deep, just below his ribs. Pain exploded through him. He fell, hitting the ground hard. Through blurring vision, he saw Nalin scream, saw the chief grab Goyathle and throw him to the ground. saw warriors surging forward. Then darkness took him. Billy woke to firelight and pain. He was lying on the cot in the adobe, his side wrapped in bandages that smelled of herbs and smoke. Nalin sat beside him, her hand on his forehead. When she saw his eyes open, relief flooded her face. "You live," she whispered. "You stupid, brave fool. You live." Billy tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Nalin lifted his head and gave him water. When he could finally talk, his voice was rough. "Goyathle?" "Dead," Nalin said flatly. "My father killed him for breaking sacred combat law, for trying to murder defeated opponent and attacking chief's daughter." She paused. "You saved my life again." Billy managed a weak smile. "Getting to be a habit." The door opened and the old chief entered, ducking under the low frame. He looked at Billy with those measuring eyes, then spoke in Apache. Nalin translated. "My father says you have honor rare in white men. You fight fairly, show mercy, then sacrifice yourself to protect his daughter. He says this creates debt." Billy shook his head slightly. "No debt. I did what anyone should do." The chief smiled and spoke again. Nalin's translation came slowly. "He says that is exactly why there is debt, because you think it is normal to act with honor." He pauses. He says he has decision to make. Over the next 2 days, while Billy healed and Apache healers tended his wound with medicines that worked better than any white doctor's remedies, warriors came and went from the adobe. They brought food, water, blankets, and news. The tribe was camped in the hills, waiting for the chief's decision. Some warriors wanted Billy dead despite his victory, arguing that no white man should be allowed to defeat an Apache and live. Others, impressed by his fighting and his mercy, argued for his life. The chief listened to all of them and said nothing. On the 3rd day, the chief returned with a dozen elders. They filled the small adobe, their presence transforming it into a council chamber. Billy sat up on the cot, his side screaming with pain, and faced them. The chief spoke for a long time in Apache. Nalin translated, her voice steady. "My father says you present problem. You defeat Goyathle fairly. Apache law says you win right to Nalin's freedom. But you are white man, outlaw, killer. Some say you will bring soldiers, bring trouble to tribe." Billy met the chief's eyes. "I've never betrayed anyone who helped me. I won't start now." The chief nodded as if he'd expected that answer. He spoke again, and Nalin's translation made Billy's heart stop. "My father says there is old law, very old. When warrior from outside tribe shows great honor, saves chief's daughter, defeats tribal champion, that warrior can be offered place in tribe." She paused, her own surprise evident. "He offers you adoption, make you Apache, give you protection of tribe." Billy stared. "Adoption? That would make me Nalin's brother." The chief smiled and spoke again. Nalin's translation came with a blush. He says adoption can take different form. If warrior and daughter both agree, marriage bond is stronger than blood bond. Gives you full tribal status, gives Nalin protection of marriage to proven fighter, solves all problems. The adobe went silent. Billy looked at Nalin, at this woman he'd known for less than 2 weeks, who had somehow become the center of his world. They'd shared danger, pain, healing, and something deeper that he didn't have words for. Marrying her would mean giving up his old life completely. No more running with outlaws, no more Lincoln County, no more being Billy the Kid. It would mean becoming someone new, someone better. It would also mean safety from Garrett's posse, from the hangman's noose, from the violent death he'd been racing towards since he was 15. But more than that, it would mean waking up every morning next to Nalin, building something real instead of just surviving, having a future instead of just a past. He looked at the chief. "If Nalin agrees, I accept." All eyes turned to Nalin. She stood, her tall frame commanding attention, and spoke in Apache. Her voice was clear and strong. When she finished, the elders nodded. The chief smiled. Nalin turned to Billy. "I say yes. I say you give me freedom to choose, so I choose you." The wedding ceremony happened at sunset 3 days later. Billy stood in Apache clothing, his wounds still healing, and spoke vows in a mixture of English and halting Apache. Nalin stood beside him in traditional dress, her bruises faded to yellow shadows, her hand strong in his. The tribe witnessed in silence. When it was done, the chief placed his hand on Billy's shoulder. "You are no longer William Bonney," he said in careful English. "You are Nalin's husband. You are Apache. You are my son." That night, in the adobe that had become their home, Billy lay beside his wife and stared at the ceiling. Everything had changed. The outlaw was gone. The man who remained was someone he was still learning to be. Nalin turned to him in the darkness. "Regret?" "Never," Billy said, and meant it. 6 months later, a rider came to the Apache camp with news that made Billy's blood run cold. Pat Garrett had tracked him to Fort Sumner and shot a man in the dark, thinking it was Billy the Kid. The newspapers were calling it justice. The territory was celebrating the death of the young outlaw. Billy listened to the news with Nalin's hand in his and felt something like relief. William Bonney was dead. The man who remained, the man who woke each morning beside an Apache wife, who was learning to hunt and fight and live by tribal law, who was building a life instead of running from death, that man was someone new, someone better. He touched the knife scar on his side, the wound that had nearly killed him, that had instead saved him. Sometimes, he thought, the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes dying as one person lets you live as another. Nalin leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "No regret?" she asked, echoing his words from their wedding night. Billy looked out at the Apache camp, at the life he'd found in the last place he'd expected, and smiled. "Not a single one."